Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk, the podcast. I am Boice. This is my podcast you are listening to. Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, established and emerging singers, singer-songwriters, musicians, music therapists. And on this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to Stephon Alexander, a physicist, a musician, and the author of his debut book called The Jazz of Physics, subtitled The Secret Link Between Music and the Structure of the Universe. Stephon is originally from Trinidad. His start in music, we talk about that as a child where he played piano, switching over to sax. We talk about his love of science. We also talk about how he made the connection between music and science and also making peace within himself and accepting his place in both worlds. We also talk about the inspiration and the process of writing his book, The Jazz of Physics. Great conversation. Also get into intuition. He explains physics to me. I don't know if I still got it. He talks about being African American in the scientific world and what that has been like for him. Wonderful time talking to him. Great show. You will enjoy it. Here it is, without further ado, my conversation with Stephon Alexander. Enjoy. You are the first physicist on the podcast. Surprise. I don't know if you're surprised by that or not.
I am surprised. I figured that there's so many of us physicists.
No, especially music, who are combining both music and physics. What came first for you, the music or the physics?
Definitely the music came first. I started off at age 8. My grandmother started me off on piano lessons.
Okay.
The idea was that I would become a classical pianist, and I hated practicing. So that lasted for about 5 years.
Okay. Yeah. The whole time you hated the piano? Practicing?
No, there were some things I liked about it. For example, one of the things I did like about the piano was I liked composing my own songs. As simplistic as they were, just, making up my own melodies and applying some of the things that I'd learned, the little theory that I learned, technique I learned, learning other people's songs.
Okay.
One thing, that I miss, but I'm getting back to, and we could talk more about that, is we did do a couple of simple Bach songs, right? And I used to love using those ideas as a motif for making my own melodies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're just like a jumping off point too.
But the funny thing is I've returned back to that now, and I'm actually practicing Bach on my saxophone.
Okay. Yeah. Did your grandmother, did she recognize that you would be good at music, or did you show signs of wanting to do that, or it was just like you're going to play an instrument?
It runs in the family. My grandmother herself studied piano. And I think she saw that as something to pass on to us and a way to connect to us, I think, I'm from Trinidad originally.
Yeah.
And my grandmother's aunt was a famous pianist from Trinidad, a classical pianist. Okay. So it was definitely something that ran in the family, that it was expected, at least by my grandmother, that we would all, as many as she could recruit, take piano lessons.
Okay.
And I'm very happy. I was,
So how'd you make? Of course, So how'd you make the switch from piano to sax? Was sax the next instrument?
Yeah, that's a fun story. So my father, it's amazing how parents or just people that you're connected to might vicariously live through you. I mean, I'm guilty of doing it. Yeah. So my father loved the saxophone, loved listening to Grover Washington, a guy named Fausto Papetti. Okay. Right. And I guess maybe wanted to play the sax himself, didn't do it. Maybe didn't have the opportunity to do it. But anyway, the story was he used to take care of this wealthy old man as one of his 4 jobs. Yeah.
So that's true.
There's something to the stereotype.
Okay.
There's something to the stereotype, but I'm the one Caribbean man that has one job. Okay, I deliberately sometimes don't take money for playing gigs.
Okay,
but my father was taking care of this guy in Connecticut, and on his way back down, driving from the Bronx, he and my mother, I think my mother was in it at the time, there was a garage sale, and it was Tim Toffel's wife, Tim Toffel, I think, was a pitcher for the New York Mets. One day won the World Series in 1986. And I guess she had bought a saxophone for him, and he never played it. Okay. So she sold it for $15. Okay. And that was when I was 12 years old. Yeah. So my dad just brought home the saxophone, and it wasn't presented to me as, hey, here's this thing that you're going to go take lessons and practice. It was more like, here's this toy. Okay. And there was this metallic toy, and that's the way I perceived it. Yeah. And then my middle school had a band, and I joined a band, thank goodness, to the New York public school system. And it was free. And we had this teacher named Mr. Pidio, who was a professional jazz trumpet player. Okay. And his day job was, he taught he taught us band. So I picked up a lot of things about the jazz tradition from, being in that. But again, it was more, I developed more as an ear player and, someone that, I would listen to the radio and play along to Careless Whisper. Remember that? Yeah. Remember that? Like, So I was more of that kind of. The sax at that age was definitely something that was not to be practiced, but to just play with, right? So that's the origin story with the saxophone for me.
So you think that was your father's trick? Was like, we're not going to present this as this thing he has to do like piano, but more like.
Yeah, I think there was a wisdom with my parents, right? That they understood something about play, the importance that what may appear to be an arduous task, if presented as play, you get the same, you get better results. Yeah. So I definitely was one of these young people that like to play with things and explore and make my own things up and create with that. And then when I found out I would be limited, then I would go and do a self-study. So, for example, I started looking at books on bebop scales because I started listening to, Miles Davis Kind of Blue and Cannonball Adderley, and I was like, that sounds really hip. I want to learn how to play like that. Yeah. And then I discovered bebop music, right? Bebop jazz. And then I started reading, books and trying to practice those things. So again, like coming from a place of play and intrigue, that was sort of the generative driving force behind, picking up the vocabulary and whatever, and the practice necessary. It's a lifelong process. Yes, As I'm saying this, I'm like, I forgot to practice this morning.
So you still daily practice or try to?
My life is, yes. The answer is the ideal is that I practice every day. I fall short of that.
Yes. Yeah. That's okay.
I take it that. Are you a musician yourself?
Yeah, I did. I play guitar. I have some music, more singing and like electronica stuff. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We should definitely talk offline. There's some electronica things I'm interested in.
So the piano, like that gets just dropped kind of as you get more into saxophone. Is that what happens?
The piano dropped completely. Okay. However, I've returned back to the piano because it's a very important, useful device for a sax player. Any kind of horn player. Yeah. I know that many horn players that I admire. They are comfortable with moving around the piano as a device to help them, see things, see the chords, and right. So I've returned back to the piano more as a sort of practice device. Okay.
And so as a kid, you're doing the saxophone. Was there the inclination towards science and that type of thing?
Yeah, because, the science thing is really about the kind of science I do is definitely about playing with ideas, trying out new ideas. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In the cases where it sometimes works, it's very surprising that it's because you made a mistake. Yeah. And all of those elements I find to be similar at least in jazz improvisation, right? I mean, there's a creative element, there's an element of play, there are schemata that you may come up with to sort of implement an idea.
Yeah.
And then there is, the sort of courage that comes with making a mistake and knowing what to do with it in real time.
Okay.
Or as Miles Davis say, you're half step away from the right note.
Whether you know it or not.
Whether you know it or not, right.
So how old were you when you saw the connection between the two? Between music and science or physics? Because did you make that connection immediately?
I didn't make the connection immediately. I mean, I was definitely I was one of those kids that was like a regular, kid from the Bronx, right? That liked to play video games a lot. Like, I love reading like Marvel comic books. Stan Lee went to my high school.
Okay.
DeWitt Clinton. So I was one of those, and then my music life, whatever I did with music, be it like, being part of a hip hop band back in the 80s, there was a band called Timbuk 3 that I was a part of with, it was a part of Native Tongue. And I was, part of, making beats and things like that. So there was that side of my life. And then there was a side of my life where I was really interested in physics. And the reason why I liked physics was that there was an intuitive side to physics as well. I mean, yes, you had, equations that you could use to sort of generalize and understand and, say very specific things about, say, motion, for example. But how people got to those equations and how people got to sort of figuring those things out, use imagination, use intuition, like our intuition just moving through the world. The intuition of, I used to ride a lot of BMX biking. I, was one of those crazy kids that jump ramps and dirt ramps and things like that. And, and that intuition developed by, basically jumping a ramp way too high and breaking your hands. So there's an intuition that's developed and that you can use that intuition to actually say things about the world, or even extend that intuition to domains where you can't even exist. Like, what does it mean to exist at the far reaches of our galaxy, right? And in environments that don't support human life. But we can imagine that, and we can expand and extend our intuition of what is known to us to those domains. And I think that in a lot of ways, jazz, and especially when I listen to the music of like people like Wayne Shorter and Ornette Coleman, they're definitely doing that in a musical domain. Pharoah Sanders is another one, right? I mean, they're bending, obviously Coltrane, they're bending the sonic sort of possibilities into realms that have not maybe been explored. I mean, definitely electronic music does that a lot, right? That's kind of what that's about, right? Anyway, so.
Okay. So when did you, just let's say, what would be a definition of physics that I could understand? Like a general, or is there? I think
a piece of physics that you can actually understand is, what Einstein taught us about what space and time really is. That the idea that space is not some empty stage. I mean, we tend to experience that as something that, as we move through space is just it provides the background through which we could move.
Okay.
But what Einstein really said, actually, space is not really that. Space reacts to how you move, so space can warp.
Okay.
And the manifestation of that, we can say, well, I don't experience that. And the reason why is that the degree to which you warp space is very weak. You need, so it's only in situations of extremely massive objects that you can really see the effects, the warping effect, the bending effect, right? So, for example, the sun. The sun is massive enough that if you think of taking a gigantic bowling ball and putting it on a mattress, it's going to bend the mattress. And the mattress is going to bend most where the bowling ball is at. And so if you could think of space like that, right, that's some kind of invisible fabric, and then you have the sun, and it bends space, then you could understand why the Earth is going around the sun.
Okay.
Because the Earth is like a little ball, like that's moving along the contours of that warp space.
Okay.
So the gravitational force between the Earth and the sun, right, is really because space is being warped around the sun.
Okay.
Okay. And so that's something I think that the minute you accept, okay, that space is malleable and it's like, like a invisible silly putty, and that matter can influence how that silly putty gets warped, then you can understand really what's going on behind the gravitational force.
Okay.
It's a manifestation of warp space-time. And then you can say, well, as a physicist, that's a new device I can use, right? I can use that device in music composition, for example, because then I can say, well, that's interesting. If I think of like a sheet of paper, where I write musical notes, right? And as the notes progress, right? I think of that on the sheet of paper as a space that the notes, which are the object sets in that space. But if I start bending the space, right? And I start saying, well, what is the relationship between how the notes could bend the space? Okay. And I start playing with that. It may lead to some interesting new ideas or devices for composition. Okay. Right? And so that's kind of like the back and forth. Sometimes, musical creativity could come from other subject matters, right? And I've been going back to my music background and my physics background. There was a time well into my college years and graduate school years where those worlds weren't talking to each other. And to me, I was actually, in hindsight, looking back at it as a young person, a lot of that actually had to do more with sociology and psychology. That I wasn't, it was a question of identity, and I don't know what the word is, but I wasn't comfortable in my own skin with with living this duality. So my music life and my music friends and my musician, whatever, that thing, right, did not really talk to my science life and my science identity. Yeah. And a lot of that was because, not a lot of it, but some of it was I wasn't ready to accept and embrace being being both at the same time. Yeah. In some respects, let's say that it may have made some of my science friends maybe less accepting of me, or my music friends less accepting of me. And that was all in my head, by the way. Yeah. It was but I think it's a real thing. I think how young people identify and what's deemed to be, acceptable in certain social settings. You're a weirdo, you're kicked out of the club because you're not one of us anymore. Yeah. That was definitely a factor, And then I started realizing that I couldn't anymore separate those two lives. I had to kind of, to be to whole with myself or happier with myself, I had to basically, sort of figure out ways to have those things speak to each other. They wanted to speak to each other because they were just occupying me all the time, right? And so then, part of that process of doing that was, first of all, having friends who are doing both things as well. My friend Jaron Lanier, who is a virtual reality pioneer. He plays hundreds of instruments, right, and collects rare instruments and great pianist, but he's also a virtual reality pioneer. My friend Brian Eno was another guy, who embraced a lot of, advanced scientific and mathematical ideas to basically, for synthesis, right, as an example, and generative music, right? So I started having friends, like-minded friends, that sort of made me feel it was okay to kind of be both. Okay. Again, it's not a big deal now. I mean, 20 years later. Yeah. But when I was younger, it was a big deal. Yeah. Okay.
Is it also too being a black male that people may not expect you to have these two worlds also? Is that also come into play?
That's absolutely the truth. Yeah, the case. I mean, first of all,
jazz is fine.
There's certain slots where it's acceptable societally for us to occupy. When I was growing up, no one, rebuked the idea if I wanted to join the track team. No one rebuked the idea if I was I just want to be a jazz cat, right? Yeah. In fact, I was, the high school performing arts was, a go-to place. I was being, my music teacher was like, I can get you in there, no problem. Right? Same thing with Julia. Like, so there was there was a slot for me. There was a slot for me in sciences if I were to, kind of be more Urkel-like.
Okay.
Or like, carry on a persona that like, characters from the Big Bang Theory kind of thing. But I was doing hip hop music at the same time. Like, my personality wasn't of that form, right? So there was a sense in which, you have, I don't know what you want to call it, but there is like, you as a young black man, you're going around the world. I'll give you an example, right? This still happens to me. Like, let's say I'm on campus, and I'm a professor, right, on campus. And I'm wearing a suit and all that stuff sometimes, right? And let's say there is, it's late at night, right? Or and there is, a white person walking in front of me. Like, there are times, often than not, where I'm like, okay, like, this person might get freaked out. I walk really fast too. Like I walk extremely fast, right? It's just a habit of mine. I mean, many of my friends are always like, please slow down when you're walking, right? And like, there are two things. I can either choose to just like, slow down my walking, but then I'm in this dilemma where there's a dark man behind him.
Yeah. I know what you're
or do I cross the street, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, when I do that, I'm like, why should I cross the street?
Yes.
And, I mean, you get what I'm saying, right?
No, I've been there, because you're thinking about the other person. Well, they may be thinking this dark person
is going to rob me or whatever. Is it, there's a criminal element.
Or should I walk fast and go ahead of them? Right. So now they don't have to worry.
And, and then the thing, like time and time again, what happens, right? There is unfortunately, a reinforcement. Because when I do pass a person, I could see the side look where they move to the side. Yeah. Right? And I've actually observed this where I've experimented. I was like, well, maybe they do that with everybody. And I've actually decided to cross the street and watch somebody else go behind, and then it doesn't happen on average, right? So these things I can't admit I've internalized those things, right? I think most black men I've spoken to, right, about this, right, offline, like this is a universal thing we accept, right? So I think this, again, like extrapolating that now to this idea of like, fitting into certain slots, that boxes that are expected of you. I mean, right now we're interviewing at Astrophysics Institute, right? Yeah. And I'll be real with you, like, I'm like, a full professor, right? Yeah. And I'm in this thing, and a lot of the people here have yet to say hi to me. Okay. Right? It's not because, they're racist or they don't like me or what have you. It's just like, maybe it's like this thing like I'm an alien. Yeah, right? And there's a thing about comfort. And some people, like, I think, again, I'm just being theoretical here, but like default mode is suggest go to what's more comfortable and stay away from that which is not comfortable if you have the leisure to do so. So, definitely, being a, professional jazz playing sax player, and a professional physicist, it's like I don't fit into I don't fit into the box. To many people, I mean, but to many people, they think that that's pretty cool. Yeah. So it's an experiment.
So is it like a series of things, like you mentioned, like Brian, that made you feel comfort in bridging the two worlds together? Yeah.
So Brian was a big part of this. I mean, Brian, just by being Brian and actually being my friend, and just, being generous with his time.
How'd you connect with him?
I met him through a colleague and a good friend, Lee Smolin, when I was living in London. Okay. And that was like 18 years ago. And, so, Brian was definitely... just by being himself, meaning that he too was one of those aliens. He was.
Nothing like Brian.
Yeah. I mean, he's extremely at one level heady, but at the same time, can be very down to earth. Yeah, and like one of the most creative people in the history of humanity, in my opinion.
I would agree. So when did you? So after you graduate high school, you go to college where? And what do you go for?
Yeah, so that was another interesting thing. So I went to Haverford College, which is I think the first Quaker institution in America.
Okay,
I may be corrected on that, or at least one of the first. And I was very lucky, but I'd gotten into I'd gotten into like Ivy League schools and that kind of stuff. And I went to Haverford. I think it's the first time I'm probably saying this publicly. But when I visited Haverford, I liked the idea that it was a small liberal arts college, right? And it was also, back then, I think it was ranked third in the country.
Okay.
It was, but what I liked about it was when I visited, one of the students who were given a tour said, how many of you want to go see the Underground Railroad?
Okay.
And you have to understand, I didn't know anything about that. Because I grew up in the Bronx. I mean, they didn't teach us that in our school system, right? I was like, what's that? And it was like, this is where, like, they transport runaway slaves. And Haverford was one of the main places for that. And then we went down to some place beyond the basement, and I'm like, this is where my ancestors, And then I said to myself, wait a minute. If an institution was doing this at the time where it was illegal, like these people are really smart, and I want to be a part of this legacy. Okay. So I was like, and these other schools that didn't do that, I was like, they're not that smart. I don't care if you're Ivy League or what have you, if you're Harvard and that kind of stuff. Like Haverford did this, and I was very proud of that. Right? That it supported the Underground Railroad. So I went to Haverford and I majored in physics. Okay, and I played in like some funk band. Right, I did. Even back then, I really didn't even know how to play. I was just having fun, like screeching notes out of my alto. 18-year-old guy with, the band leader was a guy named George Rush, who actually he's a pretty successsul bassist, I need to reconnect with George, actually. Hey, George, holler at me.
So you go, so physics, you're doing that, and what did you want to do with it? Like, you're going to teach, or did you know what you wanted to do?
Nope, I did physics because it was the thing that came easiest to me. This thought of reading pages and pages, hundreds of books, and then that stuff is intimidating, very hard. The good thing about my Haverford education is that we were required, every student was required to take expository writing for like an entire year, and they did not spare you. Okay. So like the first grade I got in that class was like a D, and the professor just, was nice to me. Yeah. And she said, it's going to be a lot of work, but we can get you there. And I learned how to write. Okay.
Because you kind of avoided that.
I avoided that. Yeah. But, so physics was more like, okay, this stuff, is fun. It comes a lot easier to me. And then this idea, though, of I wanted, one of my dreams in life was to learn quantum physics. And I knew that to one day take quantum physics, I had to be a physics major. Okay. And I had to endure freshman year of these boring physics classes, blocks going down inclined planes and pulleys and all this stuff, so that I can get to take quantum physics. I'll give you a story about that. Okay. So sophomore year, one of my professors, who was this very straight-laced, kind of religious guy, tall, like, straight-laced guy, right? You would not expect, you would be on your P's and Q's with him, very regimented and, structured. And he comes in class, first day of quantum physics, sophomore year. And he goes, I assure you that after this class, there'll be no need to drop acid. I was like, intrigued. Okay, this is very interesting. This is going to be some mind-bending stuff. Yeah. And it was.
What was the class called?
Quantum mechanics. Quantum physics. Yeah.
So what is quantum physics?
Well,
like I'm a 10-year-old. What is quantum physics?
There'll be no need to, well, before I give you a kind of version of it, let's say that one of the creators of quantum physics, Richard Feynman, says, I can assure you no one understands quantum mechanics. Okay. So there's a kind of cult, first of all, cult thing, right? Okay. Which is like, you learn it and then you do research it and then you teach it and then you realize the more you do it, the more you don't know what it is.
Okay.
Right? So I don't know what quantum mechanics is. But let me say that one of the reasons why I don't know what it is because there's this thing about, the world is made up of quantum objects. So one example of a quantum object is an electron, right?
Okay.
And so you would think of an electron, you think of like electric current, electrons flowing like water, water going through a hose through a wire, right? And then, so you have this idea that electrons are particles. But then in certain situations, you realize that the actual electrons are behaving like waves. So what is it, a wave or a particle, right? And the thing about that's weird is that it's both. It has both wave-like properties and particle-like properties.
Okay.
And depending on the situation it finds itself in, it's going to reveal more of the wave-like property than the particle. So it's like this, it's like a chameleon, right? And that, in a lot of ways, there's a fancy word for it we call complementarity, but it's chameleonness, right? And it turns out that quantum entities can have many different types of attributes, and you don't know which one is going to choose to behave more like until you actually go to watch it.
Okay.
So then there's this notion of how you as a conscious observer is interacting with this thing, right? That reveals what it's going to be more like. And so
you're an active part of
this. You're kind of an active part of what of what this thing actually, what the quantum entity actually behaves like. So there's kind of participatory type of thing about quantum mechanics. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like jazz. Because if you think about if you're if you're soloing, the rest of the band could react to what you do. But then also the audience reacts to what you do too, and all of those things basically influence what you may do next. Right? So there's this kind of participatory, that's nature of even of good jazz music. Right?
Is that a part also of what they say our thoughts influence like the universe or whatever? Like if you go, this day is going to be like this, and our thoughts are influencing, have some control over.
Well, in the sense that if thoughts, our thoughts affect our actions,
or affect our world. Do our thoughts affect the world? Is that quantum physics?
There are some theories out there that try to connect not necessarily thought but consciousness with quantum physics, but so far every attempt to try to make that very precise runs into problems, but it doesn't stop people from saying we don't understand consciousness at some level, and we don't understand quantum mechanics. So maybe those two things might have something to do with each other. And maybe it doesn't, but it's definitely something that people, very smart people, are thinking about. I'm writing my second book, and I'm going to have some fun exploring some of those questions.
Well, that's a great seg to the jazz of physics. When did you decide to write that book? How did that come about?
Book, that book I had wanted to write for a very long time, since I was a postdoc, way back in 2000. But I didn't have the chops. I didn't have the courage, and I didn't have the resources. The other thing too was that my agent. I had met my agent Max Brockman, and his father, John Brockman. And I met them when I was a postdoc, and I said, I want to write this kind of book. And they're very, they were very right at the time, and it was very good advice. And they said, well, for this kind of book, because it's a book that's basically pushing, the comfort zones, you might want to wait until you get tenure. And so I took their advice, actually.
Because some people may see this and be like, he's out of his mind. Or,
or
there's not a connection.
Or like sometimes, some naysayers will be like, this guy's stepping in my territory. Because I'm writing a book about the connection between music, in particular jazz music, and the universe or cosmology or particle physics, right? And who gives you the authority to step into my territory?
Yeah, okay.
I am a real jazz musician, and how dare you step into my territory and use my stuff, right?
Yeah.
To whatever. And as a physicist, how dare you, I don't know, what's the word, pollute, our pristine theories with these speculations. So,
and
if I
had
done that
separation of these worlds.
If I had done that before tenure, there might be a price to pay.
Okay.
But after tenure, I was like, now I'm ready to write this book. Yeah.
And when was that?
Then I started thinking about writing the book and started like planning for the book in 2012.
Okay.
And then it took a couple of years to really put it together and write it.
So did you know from when point did you decide, and you talk about analogies to get people to understand things, when did you decide that would be a force behind the book?
That came from, sort of revisiting sort of the main things. So when I started thinking about what is this book going to be about and what's going to be the thread in this book, and that took a couple of years. And then it occurred to me that there really was a true thread, and that started with the beginning of my scientific career, my research career, where I started working for Leon Cooper, who was a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize for superconductivity, and he became a neuroscientist. And I started working with him for my first PhD project. And one of the first things I learned was that the analogy between how magnets work right, at a quantum mechanical level, and using that piece of mathematics and those concepts to understand neural networks, which is something to have to do with machine learning these days and artificial intelligence. And that was an analogy. And he used something that we understood well. In this case, we understood the quantum mechanics of certain types of magnets very well, and we understood that mathematics well. And the idea was to use that as a device, as an analogy now, right, to understand maybe how memory works in the brain. And so the idea of using an analogy using something we understand very well, analogizing to something that we don't know well, and seeing how much of it we can use, and then where it falls short is actually right. It's a direction. It gives us a sense of like, okay, at the very least, inspires you to sort of be creative.
Okay, so what would you say the book is in a nutshell, or what do you want people to walk away after reading this book? Who would you say the book's about, and what would you like people to think about jazz and physics?
The book is, so if you are, a physics enthusiast and you want to kind of get a sense as to what some of the big questions are in cosmology and how the entire universe, like the questions that physicists think about the entire universe, is connected to the quantum universe, right? The book, the book actually has a lot there for you, but it's all embedded in storytelling. So there's a lot of stories and narrative, and that's coming from Richard Feynman, like his writing, that you can convey a lot of information just by embedding it in stories, and so it's a book of stories for one thing. It also gives you some tools, like if you are a designer, let's say, and you've seen the word Fourier transform used all over the place, or you hear. This is, I think, a user-friendly. I do provide certain tools that creatives can actually say, okay, I really put a lot of hard work into basically breaking down what a neural network is, or talking about what the Fourier transform is and how that has to do with signal processing, or talking about some ideas of particle physics or symmetry and how symmetry functions in physical law. But also the book is also written in a way to inspire people to actually to not limit themselves. So if you are, you're a painter, but you have an intrigue with, tightrope walking, to not limit yourself. Play with ways in which these things are connected or not, connected as a device for inspiration and a device for creativity.
Okay. Because so many people only see themselves, they can do one thing, or I'd like to do this other thing, but I'm not creative.
Right.
And that they can be open to these different things.
So it is a book about creativity as well.
Okay.
It's a book about creativity, and that creativity sometimes is actually just speculating, is actually just like, doing something, trying something stupid and seeing where it leads you.
Okay.
And so it is a book about how, how stupid I was actually during my years as a researcher.
Yeah, keeping it separate.
Yeah, yeah.
Did it take a lot of drafts to get to where it was clear what you wanted to say and that many types of people could read this?
Yeah, and I'm very grateful. I had a very dear friend of mine who's also a physicist, and her name was Dagny Kimberly, and she, even before I even submitted anything to anybody, she had painstakingly gone through the crap that I'd written and made it put it in a format where it was acceptable, right? Okay. And so and then after that it was edited like crazy, So that's the other thing I learned, that what you read in the bookstores and very far from what I have.
And did you ever imagine someone who was not good at writing in college would one day have a book?
That's a really good question. Point, actually. I never would have expected that one day I would write a book.
Yeah.
And it goes to show you and writing the book was one of the hardest thing I've ever done. And now that I'm going to be writing a second book, I'm approaching it with fear still. Yeah. But no, I never would have expected that.
Yeah.
But it goes to show you something about life, right? So think about the things that you never expect yourself doing 10 years from now, and you might.
You might be doing. So can you talk about the new book, Andy, or the germ of it?
Yeah, I can't. The new book. The new book is basically, it too is a book. It's a book on partially how to be creative. Okay. But it's written from the perspective of, so the book is about showing readers, taking readers along on a journey, rather than them being sort of receptacles of knowledge by an expert, but basically inviting them in and giving them a peek behind the curtain about what the frontier issues are in cosmology, fundamental physics. So the way I'm going to do that is to basically mainly give my perspective on some of the cutting-edge topics that me and my colleagues are currently working on, and that we have no solution to. What lurks behind the Big Bang singularity? Does quantum mechanics and consciousness really have anything to do with each other? So that there are questions, there are things that physicists and now we're forced to talk to other people in other fields that we're currently researching. And we, as Albert Einstein says about this, Albert Einstein says, if we knew what we were talking about, we wouldn't call it research. Right? Yeah. And the idea there is to also do some improvisational writing. So to show them, to demonstrate exactly how research is done and not the product of a research. Oftentimes, a lot of books are just about, I'm here to report and tell you how cool all the stuff is that we already know. Yeah. I want to show readers how physics actually is done. Okay. And the idea is that they can maybe emulate some of those things and use that in their own vocations.
Regardless of what that is.
Regardless of what that is.
Okay. And have you started the writing? Are you researching? Is it?
I started writing.
Okay, great. When are you looking to have that out? Couple years or?
Maybe in a year.
Okay, good. And also, you worked on A Wrinkle in Time, right?
That's right.
Okay, talk about that. What was that like?
Oh, that was fun. That was one of the most fun things.
The first movie you worked on?
And
That was the first movie you worked on?
First movie. Okay. I was not. Yeah, that I worked on. Yeah. So Ava, Duvernay, her team reached out to me at Disney Studios. I was interviewed. I knew that other really good people were being interviewed, and I convinced them that I should be the person. Okay. And I think the way...
How'd you do that?
Because I think for them, at least what they told me was I was able to present the necessary scientific concepts, which had to do with space and time, general relativity, quantum physics. I was able to sort of apparently the way I explain or discuss those things with them, they were able to understand it. They were able to grok it. Okay. But also, they felt like they were able to like contribute, right? So that it wasn't just going to be, I'm the science advisor to this movie, and what I say here is, it was more like, let's have a conversation about this. This is what this is. This concept is. Yeah. Now let's play with this. Okay. Right. So they really felt that I would be a good scientific collaborator with them. Okay. Which
I like is the tone in the book is that it never feels like you're talking down to someone who doesn't have that, know about physics or whatever, but it feels like very conversational and that you talking to a person as an equal almost.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's something I as a scientist, really, it's an ideal I strive for. It's, often I don't know to what extent I succeed at it, but it's definitely an ideal I strive for.
But it doesn't feel dumbed down either.
Yeah. It doesn't. That's right. I don't water it down. Yeah. That's right.
And what did they want you to do in the movie? Just sort of
anything in the movie that had to do with science, a scientific element or technological element to the movie, I advised on. Okay. From set to script to maybe how the actors
you got to go on the set and all that. Huh? You're on set. You're on set for the movie.
Oh yeah, I was on set.
Oh, that must have been exciting. Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, as a fanboy, did you get to meet Oprah?
I unfortunately did not get to meet Oprah. I got to meet pretty much everyone else. Okay. Right.
Well, she's only in the movie 2 minutes. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So you got the book, the movie. I guess that's taking up all your time. You're teaching.
I am teaching. I teach a class on my book.
Oh, really? Okay, that's great.
Yeah, at Brown University. I'm very happy that they allowed that.
Okay,
it says a lot about them. It says a lot about them.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? Any other things coming up for the year? That take care of me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of gigs, music gigs. These days, I attempt to combine them with giving sort of presentations and playing. Okay. I'm doing some stuff with the bassist Melvin Gibbs and Marcus Miller, who's also a mathematician and a sax player. Yeah. So we have some things come together, composing some music inspired by physics.
Okay, nice.
It has to sound good, so I think that's, some research, just, trying to work on some interesting problems in cosmology. Yeah.
Excellent. And best place people can check out what you're doing online?
StephonAlexander.org.
Okay.
STEPHON Alexander, one word, .org.
Okay. And the book, Jazz of Physics, which people must read?
JazzofPhysics.com.
Yeah. Great. Did I leave out anything, Stephon?
I think we covered a lot of bases. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure. Enjoy this. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, sir.
And there you have it, my conversation with Stephon Alexander. Get his book, The Jazz of Physics, out now in paperback. Check out his websites, jazzopphysics.com or stephonalexander.org. You can find interviews, lectures, music performances. It's all there on one of those two sites. I'm online at talkmusictalk.com for more podcast information. You can also follow me on social media at This Is Boice, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that, and some call to actions for you. If you enjoyed this episode with Stephon, please share it on social media. Just tag me. You can also leave a 5-star rating and or review wherever you are listening. This all helps to grow the Talk Music Talk audience so I can monetize this damn show. Also, did you know that Talk Music Talk has an app? That's right. It is free wherever you like to get your apps. You can also stream or subscribe to the podcast pretty much everywhere. iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio. Just search for Talk Music Talk. And finally, you can also find the podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/This Is Boice, starting with episode 100. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.